Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as I have many times in the last several years, and I know I'm not alone in this, of course, to talk about, unfortunately, to have to talk about yet another mass shooting. This one occurred in my home state, in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, in the southwestern corner of our state, in the city of Pittsburgh, and in a community known as Squirrel Hill. I come today to do a couple of things. Number one is to honor the victims of this mass shooting and the individuals who were injured. Of course, to offer condolences to the grieving families again, to express gratitude for the law enforcement and medical professionals who responded to the scene, and of course to stand with a community in the face of hate and terror. On this occasion, this deadly mass shooting occurred in one community, but it also occurred in a house of worship. It resulted in the deaths of 11 innocent Pennsylvanians. It left 6 people injured, including 4 law enforcement officers responding to the scene. It was a targeted, hateful attack on the Jewish community in Pittsburgh, as I mentioned, in the Squirrel Hill community in the city of Pittsburgh. It was an act of violence that we must work to ensure never happens again. And it was just a couple of weeks ago, long before Election Day, on Saturday, October 27th, 3 congregations, the Tree of Life congregation, Dor Hadash congregation, and New Light congregation, all 3 were engaged in Shabbat morning services at the Tree of Life Synagogue in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood, which is a residential part of the city of Pittsburgh. As these worshipers were engaged in services, what played out was the worst deadly act of violence, or I should say the most deadly act of violence against the Jewish community in American history. These congregants were targeted for one reason: because of their religious beliefs, because they happened to be Jewish. And their lives were changed forever by one hateful act of terror, as were the lives of those who were injured. So our deepest condolences are with the families of the 11 victims of this attack. Here are the names of the 11. Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal and his brother David Rosenthal, Bernice and Sylvan Simon, Daniel Stein, Melvin Wax, and Irving Younger. May their memory be a blessing to their families and community. It's difficult to even begin to adequately express the hurt that this community has endured, the horror that these families have endured, and the hurt that is still part of this community. Maybe one of the best ways to convey not just our condolence and our sympathy, but also our solidarity with those who face that horror and that danger and that hate, is to talk about what those folks did in that dark, dark hour. And it literally was about an hour, maybe a little more than that, that morning, that Saturday morning. We, of course, at this time, and so many have since that date, pay tribute to those in law enforcement who confronted the murderer with uncommon valor. We pay tribute as well to the emergency service professionals, nurses and doctors and others who ministered to those who were wounded and tried their best to minister to those who were dying. All of these individuals, and it's impossible to name all of them, whether they're in law enforcement or medical professionals or emergency personnel, all of these individuals were, at that moment, as they always are, servants in the most profound meaning of that word. These were servants who came forward to help in that darkness. They came forward to save and to comfort. And as the great hymn tells us, that goes by the title of the Servant Song, these were servants who were holding the light for these individuals in the nighttime of their fear. That's what that song reminds us, the Servant Song. So in that nighttime of fear, when a gunman with very powerful weapons is shooting directly at individuals, targeting them in a house of worship, with no protection at all for those who were victims, and those who were targets but who survived but had to wait what must have seemed like an eternity for help because the gunman was in control of that scene for a period of time. They were in that nighttime of their fear, and those servants came forward to bring some light to that darkness, to bring light to that nighttime of their fear. People all over the world have marveled at the strength, the resolve, and the love of the people of Pittsburgh, a community that is, as they've said so many times since then in that community, it's a community that is stronger than hate, and I would argue stronger than ever. So we're thinking about those families, we're thinking about those who gave so much in that hour of tragedy and horror and death and darkness. But we also have to do more than that. Commendation and sympathy and condolences and solidarity and being determined to try to prevent this from never happening again. All of that is important, but we have to do more. We have to also act, or maybe it's better to say to take action, to enact common sense policies, laws, and other policies that will at least reduce the likelihood that these acts of violence will in fact continue to occur. This is a problem, this problem of mass shootings is a uniquely American problem that has to be solved by the American people, of course through their elected representatives at every level of government, but maybe most especially here in the United States Senate, in the other body, the House of Representatives, working with the executive branch. I believe we have to take action. No single law or no series of measures, even if they were to be enacted into law, will remove the possibility that these mass shootings and other examples of horrific gun violence will suddenly vanish from the earth and never happen again. But there are steps we can take that will, for sure, reduce the likelihood. The point I've made all along is that we've got to take action, enough action, even a series of actions that might prevent one of these. One fewer incident where kids are killed in a school, like we saw 6 years ago in Newtown, Connecticut, Sandy Hook Elementary School. One less example of people being gunned down in a nightclub or in another school in Florida, and now in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. What do we need to do? Well, we could start with measures that have broad-based support, some of them support by 80 to 90% of the American people. We could require universal background checks. I think that's about a 90-10 issue, maybe. Ban military-style assault weapons. Millions of them on our streets already, weapons of war on our streets and in our communities. And limit high-capacity magazines that allow hundreds of rounds to be fired in just a matter of seconds or minutes. We must keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, suspected terrorists, and individuals convicted of hate crimes, stalking, domestic violence, and dating violence. These policies can't prevent every act of violence or replace what has been lost at the Tree of Life Synagogue or in communities across the nation. Most recently, the most recent, of course, in California. But we can take action. And I don't think it's in the best interest of the American people to surrender to this problem, to surrender to this uniquely American problem, and just throw up our hands and say, there's nothing we can do, some might say, about mass shootings. There's nothing we can do, some might argue, to lose over 30,000 lives a year to gun violence. I think we can take action. I think we can do more. At a minimum, we have to try. And all of the measures I mentioned, and you could add more, like plugging the loophole that says if you're too dangerous to get on an airplane because you happen to be a terrorist, or we have a reasonable suspicion, a well-grounded suspicion that you're a terrorist, that you can't get on an airplane, why would that same individual be allowed to have a weapon? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So we have some work to do as legislators and as Americans to try to reduce the likelihood that these attacks will continue. None of the measures that I've outlined here today, and we could add more to the list, are in any way inconsistent with the Second Amendment or in any way would undermine the right of a law-abiding American to purchase a firearm and to use a firearm for self-protection or for hunting or whatever else. We have to take action at long last. It's been too long, too many tragedies, too many lives lost, and the response by the Congress for years now, you could even say decades, has been to throw up their hands and say, there's nothing we can do. I don't believe that about America, that the most powerful nation in the world can do nothing on this issue. We need to do more. We need to debate it on this floor again, but to do something we haven't done in a substantial way in at least 6 years, and that's to have votes on this floor that deal with this issue. We have to solve a lot of problems in the weeks that remain in this Congress and in a new Congress. But one of them is this, to begin to solve this problem that only America has suffered from. It's difficult, it is contentious, and it's certainly not a problem that has an easy solution. But to do nothing, which is basically what the Congress has done for far too long, to do nothing is not in the best interest of the American people. I would argue it's inconsistent with our values, it's inconsistent with who we are. So, Mr. President, as we express condolences for those who have loved and lost, those families who have suffered either the loss of a loved one or are still suffering because a loved one is injured, the law enforcement who were injured in this incident, and as we commend and salute the good work of law enforcement, the good work of medical service professionals, those professionals who are on our streets every day saving people. As we do all of that and offer those words of sympathy and condolence and commendation, let us also be determined as a people to begin to reduce the likelihood that we're going to be the only country in the world that continually suffers and endures mass shooting after mass shooting, losing lives all throughout these many years just in the last couple of months. I think that's a challenge, but also solving that problem is a mission worthy of a great country. Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
And the clerk should call the roll.